Spectre Vision Radio.
Hey, real quick, before we get into today's episode, we wanted to let you know about a live event we'll be doing next week. If you're in or near Los Angeles on Friday night, August 29th, all three of us will be at Lights in the Sky, and here I'll read the description on the flyer. An all-star panel of podcasters come together for a probing discussion on the psi nature of the UFO phenomenon. So it'll be me, Tom, and Mal on the panel with Dave Foley, Tom Wheeler, Rizwan Virk, and Danny Sheehan, which is frankly unbelievable. The probing discussion, pun I'm quite sure intended, will be hosted at the Philosophical Research Society and moderated by Daniel Noah, who runs the Spectre Vision Radio Network and who we all love. All right, once again, this thing is next Friday, August 29th at 7:30 p.m. in Los Angeles, specifically Los Feliz, and we'll leave a link in the description. Please come if you can. Okay, on to the show. This is Gods, Ghosts, and UFOs, the biggest podcast in the universe. Hello and welcome. My name is Jordan, and right now, Mallory is traversing the Enchanted Highlands, so Tom and I invited a friend of the show and fellow intrepid podcaster, Kelly Chase, to keep Mal's seat warm today. Kelly, by way of further introduction, I was listening to the Great Dangerous Books podcast, a new show by James Madden and Jared Zimmerer, who, just like us, had you come on as a guest for their inaugural episode, and James called you the Renaissance Woman of the Weird, which I thought was pretty much the perfect way to describe you. Anyway, welcome back. It's been a little while.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I feel like we're already all old friends, and I'm glad to be back.
Kelly, I consider you the godmother of Gods, Ghosts, and UFOs because we were like in our sandbox playing, and you were like, I can make that world real with my magic wand. I mean, like, it honestly felt that way. And like, just we're ride or die. Aww. With you and Cosmosis. I mean, it's like, you know, your program is hot off the airwaves when it's in my earbuds. So how wonderful to be on Spectre Vision Radio with you and your crew and some other real killers.
Yes.
We feel very fortunate indeed.
We're all geeking out about that a little bit.
Yeah, we're
geeking
out.
Started recording.
Yeah, it's an incredible lineup. So many of my favorite shows are on there. I'm so glad you guys are on here. Our dear friend Mike Cleland, Mitch Horowitz has his show. I love the Weird Studies guys. I could go on and on. There's so many incredible shows on the network, and it just feels like a homecoming for all of us. So thrilled to be a part of the family with you guys.
You know, the word's been overused, but community is, I think, applicable here. And I think we haven't even gotten started laying the mortar to the brick. And I'm beyond. Do you
know what other word is overused? Love. Love is overused to death. And whatever. It still is. It still is the thing. So, you know what? Community, we can overuse it all we want because it is the thing.
It is the thing. It is the horizontal organization that we so badly need right now in the era of vertical organizations, which we don't want. And that leads me, can I segue to my first question, which is, you know, I think a lot of people, present company probably included, have been waiting for disclosure from the top down, from the government, from the, you know, the tower of social hierarchy to, you know, tell us what's been going on, and sort of assuming that maybe we wouldn't ever really get it or get the whole story. And I'm wondering sort of like, is there a measurable distance between where you are now with respect to big D disclosure and where you might have been when you started on this journey?
Yes.
Tom. That's a for the audience question because Tom knows.
Of course I know, but I want to hear.
There's so much distance that you can't even see the 2 points from each other.
There are people. There are people waiting. There are people standing by.
Yes,
and saying true. This is the age of disclosure.
Well, you know, and God bless them, and I hope they're having a great time.
They should stay hydrated.
Right. Yeah. I mean, listen, that's what brought me into this whole mess. I found Lou Elizondo back in 2021 when I really started asking questions. I found him to be extraordinarily compelling, and I thought that the story that was being told and what was happening was the most interesting thing that had ever happened, and that it had this air of inevitability about it. And I couldn't believe my luck that I'd somehow found this thing right before things got like really, really interesting. And I got pulled in and I was on the bandwagon and I was rah-rahing the whole thing. And, you know, at some point along the way, there were always these researchers, like the people who had been doing it for longer, the people who had been here before 2017, who I would be like, well, what do you think about disclosure? And they would just laugh and they would just be like, listen, it's your first time, huh?
Oh, man.
I love your confidence.
Right? And I'd be like, no, it's for real this time. And they'd be like, no, but come talk to me in a few years. And I started to understand what they were talking about. I think that there is such a reality to the phenomenon and that there is so much that they are trying to cover up. But what's been erected around it is one of the most complex smoke screens I think that's ever been erected. It's the whole thing is theater. It's a circus. And you can watch it unraveling day by day. The biggest reason to me why I've walked away from disclosure, which I say I've walked away, I still talk about it constantly. I wish I could walk away. And that ex-girlfriend who like never really gets over it. But but I think I will say with disclosure is that it bears almost no resemblance to what actual experiencers and people are reporting about how this phenomenon is affecting them in their everyday lives. It feels like this kind of bizarro world version of this thing that those of us who are experiencing it really want to talk about. And so in a lot of ways, it just sort of lost its sparkle.
The thing that you did just right out of the gate with UFO Rabbit Hole that thrilled me, like I assiduously avoided UFO stuff because I found it sort of unnerving and, you know, a thicket that could not be negotiated. And you were like, yes, let's talk about it. And then immediately Plato's Cave and immediately like, how do we know what we know? And the semiotics of it and how it affects us personally and how we can develop a posture toward it, not, I don't know, some deep conspiratorial, horrible miasma. And I was like, this has practical use. It doesn't matter that you're talking about whatever UAP or abduction experience. It doesn't matter that you're talking about stuff that could be upsetting or challenging, you know? And you're saying, this is what ontological shock is. And I'm like, you know, when I said, which one of these do I listen to? And he's like, oh, Kelly Chase. You know, that's the introduction to the phenomenon, and I am better for it. So that wasn't a question. I just wanted to say thanks. You're such a guide, you know, you're such a Beatrice to so many Dantes, and I'm like fanboying. So I'll turn it over to Jordan.
Well, I do want to follow up a little bit target the question a little bit more at the idea of maybe the possibility or lack thereof that earnest, well-intentioned and intelligent people in Congress, acknowledging that intelligent, well-intentioned people in Congress might even be more elusive than UFOs themselves, but that maybe they can actually make a difference. And I'm wondering if you retain any cautious hope that the needle can be moved in positive directions by people who really are trying to do the right thing.
I mean, I'm always the optimist at the end of the day. I feel like sometimes I don't sound like that to people, and it's maybe just because I'm such an optimist that the cynical take doesn't really disturb me. Because I do think everything will turn out in the end. I think with disclosure, a lot of the hope that I get from this is that I've seen over and over again over these last several years very clear attempts by various factions to take control of the narrative. And I get my hope from the fact that it never works very well, that there's a lot of hands kind of grappling for the remote, and that there's been a lot of attempts to kind of keep this thing contained and within certain parameters. And it can't be contained. It can't. And there's too many people who are interested in it, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately. There are so many people who are determined to make money off of it. I don't love that. But at the same time, I think that in some ways, the private sector and the tech world has done more to drag this out of the shadows. They're going to drag it straight to hell, but they're dragging it out of the shadows, you know, so that people are paying attention. And I just think that human curiosity and the humans' ability to ultimately discern truth when they're confronted with it, I believe in that. I really do. And I think that as messy and awful as this whole process has been and probably will continue to be, that there are people who are waking up to it and recognizing that there's something going on here, and that once that portal of inquiry is open for a person, it really can't be closed again. And so I think that they're trying to control the uncontrollable, and I welcome watching it spin out of control.
and like, you know, leaving that aside, experience or narratives have always been sort of marginalized and discounted. And it doesn't have to be UAP. It can be Bigfoot. You know, I am, you know, the self-proclaimed leading expert on reported rains of flesh and blood in 19th century America. And the reason I believe they happened is because the preponderance of first-person accounts from people that, from, you know, slaves and Union officers, the people who had the experience were so varied and so maximally diverse, and the experiences they described were so self-contained and consistent. And so if we just leave the machinations of governmental or non-governmental agencies aside, what is there to be gained, or how can we further benefit from amassing and collating data from firsthand accounts?
I love that question. I mean, I think that a lot of it comes down to, number one, we're opening up a huge part of what it means to be human that's been really amputated from us in the modern age. I've spent so much over the last 4 years since my own anomalous experience. It was hardly the first one, but it was definitely the one that ripped me open. And then I go back and I look at these other things in my life, and I realize that I've been having anomalous experiences this whole time, but that when these things happen to you that were told are impossible, you end up building up all this shame around it. You hide it even from yourself. You don't talk to other people. You assume it's some kind of a one-off or whatever, and these things just get buried. And what happens when you begin to understand that impossible things do happen is this process of like excavation and this reclaiming of parts of yourself, and I think really sacred parts of yourself that get lost along the way. And so I think that there's something really powerful in that. And further, beyond just sort of this cultural healing that I think needs to happen because we've been amputated from this really important part of being human, is that I think that there is a core element to the secrecy around this that is directly related not to UFOs and to what these other beings are, but who we are and what we are capable of doing. I think the powers that be are extraordinarily terrified of humans realizing our own potential and our own innate abilities, and that is something that I think we can also recover through this kind of collective reclaiming of the impossible.
Oh, man, I love collective reclaiming of the impossible. I'm a collector of beautiful turns of phrases, and that is awesome. One of the things that I see, to kind of circle back a little bit to the chaos and deception of the quote-unquote disclosure movement, whatever you want to call whatever, it's just the mess, is that there are so many different kinds of narratives coming from so many different corners of what should be a cohesive movement, but is absolutely not. And it strikes me that you'll see sort of in the same week, you'll see, last week, I think it was last week, we covered, quote unquote, covered a story about Congressman Burleson talking about how he heard from, Dr. Davis about these 4 races of aliens or whatever. And, which is so, it seems so insane that this is like, that there's that narrative, right next to that sort of official report that was covered by the Washington or the Wall Street Journal or something about how all of the UFO sightings were all just psyops, yeah, there was nothing anomalous anywhere in any report anywhere. And it's like these two narratives seem so radically different from each other. But I think the thing that they share, the thing that they have in common, is that they seem built for people who want to hear them. So right. If you are the kind of person who wants to hear that it's all nonsense and that's baseless and there's nothing to it because the alternative scares you or you're not comfortable with it or whatever, then here's a narrative for you. And if you're the kind of person who wants there to just be the lizard people and insectoids and whatever crawling in the hybrid programs or whatever, and you have all these conspiracy theories, well, here's a narrative for you. And if you've already decided what you want, then it seems like there's something on offer from who knows. But to me, that's the part of it that seems really orchestrated. And so I'm really interested in this is, I don't know if there is a question in here. I'll see if we can conjure one. In order to find the truth, you have to kind of let go of whatever it is you thought you wanted it to be true. And that's really hard to do. I don't know how to do that, really. I've gone on record a bunch of times saying, I want all of it to be true. Like, I want a little bit of everything to be true. The only thing I don't want to be true, the only thing that I've sort of rejected with my soul, is the kind of dead universe cosmology of materialism, of strict materialism. That's the only thing that I'm like, nope, if that's true, I die happy not believing it. So I'm curious how you sort of navigate or remain aware of your own desires, of your own sort of propensity to feel like you want this particular thing to be true, which makes you vulnerable to the narratives that are being constructed for that desire.
I mean, it's something you have to grapple with. And part of grappling with it, I think, is understanding that it's not something that we can escape. When humans are confronted with the unknown, when we're pushed out onto the fringes of things, our inevitable response to that is storying. Like, we have to find some kind of a narrative that's going to stitch all of this back together again. And when we're on the edge of the unknown and we don't have context, right, there's no way for us to like check this work and decide, you know, there's no like strong source material to go back to that's going to tell us like, yes, definitively, this is right and this is wrong. Ultimately, we end up choosing the stories that we like the most and the stories that do something for us in terms of confirming our own worldview. And I think that's okay. I think that can be really generative. I think it can be really fulfilling. I think it can be really meaningful. You do have to be careful to make sure that, you know, you are choosing the stories and that you're choosing them for reasons that are human-centered and heart-centered and, you know, that bring some kind of positivity and usefulness into the world. But, like, I don't know how to get past that part. You know, at the end of the day, we're all just kind of telling each other stories. And I love that. And I love living in that fringe of the weird, but it does make one quite vulnerable. More than anything, I just want to make sure that the actions that I'm taking as a result of these stories that I have come to believe or disbelieve are actions that align with a deeper sense of integrity and responsibility, and that I'm not just letting myself get carried away or to betray those parts of myself.
If you think of an alien as an extraterrestrial being, you're closing off entire worlds of possible insight and knowledge. If you think of a ghost as the persistence of a deceased individual's personality, that's really more of a narrative structure than anything that is going to lead you to any kind of meaningful understanding. And I think even more important to that is the thing that you said about, oh, I've been experiencing these things my whole life, but they were surrounded with shame. And the stigmatization of everything is the opposite of healing, right? It's the continuation of suffering that same thing, you know. And I remember distinctly you saying something probably in association with, you know, hanging out with Whitley Strieber about how, hey, you know what? It's time to get into the really weird personal narratives. And everyone was afraid to do so in this community because they were going to get, you know, laughed at or, you know, be treated with derision. But we're ignoring something that is foundational to this experience. And if all we do is destigmatize and say, you know, we say on this show, it's our job to bear witness to the experiencers. We're not sitting in judgment. We're not believing everything that we're told. But at the same time, we're not going, you're crazy or you're a whack job, because then you're closing the door on something potentially profound.
Well, and I've been so lucky to have met and become friends with so many really profound experiencers. And the thing that I've found with all of these things is that my heart had to change before my mind. In some ways, I think the real disclosure is the experiencers. And it's not just the experiencers, it's the emotions that are left behind. I think it's really difficult to listen to somebody recount something and to really hear and understand the kind of trauma and the horror or the destabilization or even the euphoria that came from that experience, and to see how someone changes in the wake of it and then to say, like, nothing happened here. You know, I was absolutely never going to consider Bigfoot as a possibility. I just felt like that's a bridge too far. We're not going there. But I was listening to an episode of Sasquatch Chronicles, and this guy was recounting a story. He was in his 70s that he hadn't told since he was a kid. He had in his late teens, early 20s, this encounter out in the woods with his friends where they had seen a Sasquatch cross over their trail, and that they all got so scared that, like, some of them wet themselves and they were climbing over each other, clawing over each other to get away from this thing. But the thing that really struck me was this guy talking about, and he was sobbing, like about how it had hurt his relationships between him and his friends because, you know, a man is supposed to be a certain kind of thing. And that in that moment, they all just ran and clawed over each other to get away. Like nobody was acting as he felt a man should act. And that he and his friends then like carried that, and that they never spoke about it, but he had this deep sense that they all knew that about each other now. And he was sobbing because he was like, he hadn't met his wife till a few years later, but he's like, what if my wife had been there? Like he's like, I would have treated her the exact same way. And that to me, I was like, oh, well, like Bigfoot's real, right? Because that kind of story and that kind of emotional depth doesn't come out of nowhere. Like something happened to that man and he was telling the truth of it. And so I think it's really important for experiencers to tell their stories and for people to be willing to listen.
You could say, oh, Bigfoot's real and it doesn't matter. Like the thing that matters is what happened to him. The thing that matters is the change.
Right.
The thing that matters is the
Right.
the
Right.
product of the experience. To watch someone go through a radical change, it feels and is, I think, in a very real sense, miraculous. And so a lot of the things that we talk about, or the phenomena that we talk about, they only matter insofar as they affect human beings. Because otherwise, what would be the point? You know, it would just be like, okay, cool. You know, I think it's pretty incredible that there is such a thing as squids. That's amazing. But like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. You know, it's cool. It's cool. And cool is great, but it's not meaningful. It's only meaningful when it involves the kind of thing that we're talking about, this sort of actual impact on a person, a personality, and an outlook, whatever you want to call it.
Oh gosh, I completely agree. And you know, people are always there's a faction of people who I get a lot of emails and messages from who are like, why aren't you paying attention to these Nazca mummies? And I'm like, to be honest, the reason I'm not paying attention to the Nazca mummies is because I don't care. Like
Hang on just
waiting.
a second. I'm gonna cross one of the questions off of our list.
That's okay. I'm going to get into Avi Loeb and the doomsday machine that is hurtling our way, which I have assiduously avoided, by the way. I'm like, don't care. Don't care
Right.
about
Yeah.
Well, that's how I felt the mummies. I'm like, I mean, I'll be interested to hear when the jury's in and they tell us, you know, one way or another, but it doesn't change anything for me. I fundamentally believe that beings like that exist because people are seeing them. And like, you know, the mummies themselves just don't hold a lot of pull for me personally. I'm glad that they do for other people. Like, I'm glad that somebody's looking into that, and I'll be curious to hear how that all turns out. But it's just not a story that I'm particularly compelled by because it doesn't change anything for me personally.
You know, what people call proof is a moving target, and then it gets into the sort of, you know, Charles Fort's damned data, where it's like, well, that didn't, you could never prove it because that doesn't happen because it can't happen. And then you just hit a wall, you know, when in
Right.
fact, to me, and this is sort of what I want to ask you about, is data aggregation. You get enough people to tell their stories and the patterns will emerge from those stories. There will be outliers where you're like, maybe that is not necessarily credible or it's just simply an outlier, but you do start to see patterns emerging if you just listen. Do you have a sense of the emerging sort of pattern of this phenomenon in terms of what it might be, why it happens, and how it is affecting, and whether or not we're on some... It feels like we're in a place of gaining momentum, but maybe that's just because of my own increased awareness of it.
So we are making progress with that. There are a bunch of studies being done now. I'm on the advisory board of one study that's a study of super experiencers. And I know that there's other work being done, like the metadata analysis of the Strieber letters and also the John Mack files, and I think a few others down at Archives of the Impossible. And I have some friends of mine who are working on that project.
So cool.
And it's so cool.
So cool.
What's
By the
hard
way, if and when it's ever appropriate timing wise, I would love to talk to some of those people. I want to hear, even before they publish anything, I want to hear what their experiences are in like doing that work, because it's
my God,
so awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to connect you to Kim Engels. She's a philosopher who's doing a lot of their phenomenology work down there, with the archive study, which is really interesting. But I'd happy to connect you with anybody involved with those. But what's really interesting in seeing how these studies are developing is recognizing like how nascent we are in just the study of experiences. There's been no real central place to hold all of this, to house all of this information. And because I think each little microcosm of our culture deals with the anomalous in different and sometimes overlapping, but sometimes not overlapping ways. So you can do a metadata experience or study of like they're doing with the John Mack files and the Strieber letters. But what you're getting are people who worked with John Mack, who he sought out because their experiences kind of looked like these other experiences of people that he was talking to. Or with the Strieber letters, people who read Communion, and there were aspects of that they were like, this sounds like what happened to me.
For sure.
And so, even in the super experiencer study that I'm on the advisory board for, they're still asking the question of these are people who are self-selecting as super experiencers, and we don't have really strong boundaries around any of those words or what they mean or what they don't mean. I personally think there's an argument to be made that all humans basically qualify as super experiencers.
Are you alive?
Right.
Are you metabolizing food? We're all having a pretty super experience.
Right. And then all of this is more or less coming from the United States or from Western English speaking culture, and other cultures handle it and think of it very differently. How do you find people who are having these experiences, but they're calling it something else entirely, or they're interpreting it? So I guess that is to say we are finally beginning to make progress, but I think that we have a long, long, long way to go in terms of even figuring out how to properly compile this data and what to do with it. It's exciting, though, that it's happening.
Well, you mentioned it being nascent and that we're sort of on the very beginning of this ride. And it makes sense because, and I mean, just to shout out the subtitle of our own show, which is that this is a podcast about all the stuff they said wasn't real. They said it wasn't real. That was the reason we haven't done a study on these experiences is because anytime anyone ever talked about it, it was that's not real. It's not real.
Well, they'd be drummed out of their discipline too,
Yeah, I remember an early conversation I had with the guy from MUFON who specialized in on-craft encounters with non-human intelligences, extraterrestrials, whatever you wanted to call them. And he had talked to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and he's got this real rigorous way of trying to identify whatever veracity of stories or whatever. But the thing that I've remembered from that conversation more than anything else is just the numbers and him talking about how he's these are just the people that I've talked to, not including the people that have talked to many other MUFON researchers, not including the many, many people who didn't even know MUFON existed, not including the countless, and every time you go out a concentric circle, it gets bigger, much, much bigger. And so then the widest circle of all is all the people who never said anything because they were part of a culture where they just believed from the beginning that there was nothing to it. So it's just how many people are we talking about? And Kelly, you said, I think everyone is probably an experiencer. And I think you're right.
I think one of the issues also that's freaking everybody out, and, normally I sort of bristle at the idea of, the giant paranormal basket. We make light of it with the name of our show. But it's just, do we understand it? No, go in the closet. Paranormal, it's ghosts, it's all kinds of stuff. But one of the things that I think there is a through line to it is that with respect to that multivarious phenomenon, we ourselves, the individuals, the experiencers, are to some degree co-creators. And by that, I don't mean that we make it up necessarily, but we could fill in the blanks, or we are involved in ways we don't even understand. I was talking to Jordan about this the other day, and I was I believe the reason that all 50s UFOs look like, TV dinner trays was because that was the sort of form that people could sort of understand, about the way the entity looks or the way their craft looks, And so sci-fi movies, it looks like it happened in 1974. That makes it sort of easy to dismiss until you go wait a minute, the thing is interacting with us, or there's a space in the middle between it and us where we're meeting that. Does that resonate with you at all?
Oh, absolutely. I think, one of my favorite examples is the Kenneth Arnold sighting, considered to be the first modern UFO sighting. And what I find so absolutely fascinating about that is he describes is that we're told that what he saw was flying saucers. But if you look at the original source material, he said that they moved like flying saucers. But he described kind of more of not quite a disc shape, and it had a little more like a boomerang shape. And what I find so fascinating about that is that he says that like he saw flying saucers, and then people start seeing flying saucers. But more than that, once they started really looking into like zero-G technology and like what kind of shape of a craft would like lend itself to that, it would have to be a saucer. And until you can recognize like that series of events and also understand that Kenneth Arnold saw something real that day, like when you can combine all of those facts and hold them in tension together, I feel like you're at the very beginning of being able to even just talk intelligently about the UFO phenomenon, because that's really what we're dealing with, is something that works in that way.
And the other preconception we have to let go of, there's so many, there's at least 7 veils of misapprehension, but one of them is that we are all discrete entities, that I am a self-contained discrete entity witnessing a thing that is separate from me, and Alan Watts would like a word. And that's just difficult.
We just dropped an interview on Cosmosis with a dear friend of ours, Joshua Cutchin, who wrote this wonderful new book. He's written so many incredible books, but his new book is Fourth Wall Phantoms, and it's about what he calls fictional incursions, situations where fictional characters have shown up in people's real lives. And I, despite doing all of this weird work, right, had kept back in my back shame closet a story about a fictional incursion that I'd had when I was a teenager, where I was writing a fantasy novel and I started seeing my main character, and my parents literally put me on psych meds over it. And I don't blame them for that. I think my dad was a psychiatrist, right? When you're a hammer, everything's a nail. But also,
he was doing what he thought was right. He was doing
right.
Yeah.
But I've had to like hold on to that my whole life, thinking like there was this piece of me that was like, well, really, I am kind of crazy though, right? And so being able to read a book by somebody who gave all these examples of people throughout history who have had that happen to them, at least you feel like, you're in better company. But also it gave me another layer of understanding, because to what you're speaking about, Tom, this kind of co-creative aspect of the phenomenon, that when it comes to the impossible and these things that occur in our lives, that we do have some kind of a co-creative role, and that it might be far more profound than we think it is, that the role that we play.
And what I heard the interview is fantastic, and he's like, it's more than an egregore or a tulpa. In other words, it's more than something you created and brought into existence. There is a collaborative process here with your consciousness and the mystery, and it reminds me of my friend John's definition of the artist, which is midwife to the unmanifested. And so it's not like it wasn't there in potential, but you show up and you're the person prepared to receive it or co-create with it or let it assume this certain form. And it's, I guess, all we can do now to go like, we admit the possibility that is real and it might happen. And then what do you do?
What do you do?
What do
I
you
haven't
do?
figured that out yet.
Well, this leads me to my next question, which is like, I heard you say that for your 3rd season, you guys are going out in the field.
Yes.
And please tell us more.
Yes, please.
Because I want to know where,
Please.
can you talk about where you're going? And
Well, one thing that's exciting about the new season of Cosmosis is the first season we released through like Amazon and Apple TV and a bunch of other places. And that was a really cool experience. You can still find it there if anybody's looking for it. It's called Cosmosis, UFOs in a New Reality. We had such an incredible experience going into the field and working with experiencers on the first season. And I think that both my creative partner and I, J. Christopher King, really fell in love with that. There are things that you can learn about the phenomenon by just going out and engaging with it, by just being present, by just listening, that I don't think you could find in 1,000 books. And so we really wanted to bring that aspect in. And we also didn't want to spend months and months trying to turn this, 3 episodes around. We were like, let's see if we can do this, but faster. And so we're going to be releasing it actually on like the podcast RSS feed. It'll be on Spotify video and YouTube.
Oh my gosh. This is news to me. This is news.
Yeah, this is all news.
This is my favorite news.
We're going to just do it as it comes. Like we're going to do it in chunks. And as it's finished, we're going to immediately put it out. And then we're going to keep going. So,
and will thus become the greatest podcast in the history of podcasts.
Oh my God.
So awesome.
So yeah, we spent this last about 10 days together filming. The first episode is kind of like an origins episode, just to kind of tell our story. Jay in particular is somebody who is extraordinarily well known in like the inner circles of ufology and is more connected than I'll probably ever be. But he's not like a content creator, right? Like he's an artist, and he's a researcher, and he's a community builder. And I've kind of dragged him kicking and screaming into this content creation world. And so I'm really excited for people to get a little more introduced to Jay and understand like what our relationship is like and why he's become such an important part of my work. But then after that, it's out into the field. We already shot some great stuff with, I can't tell too many details, but we hung out with these two old school paranormal research guys. Like this one guy has had a hotline for 66 years, and he gets multiple phone calls a day of people just being like, I've got a haunting, I've got a Bigfoot sighting, I've got a UFO sighting. And he investigates this, and he's been doing it for years, like relatively under the radar. So we're excited to see him. We've got some pretty big announcements that we're cooking on that I can't quite talk about, but we're also going to be taking everybody with us to a fireside chat at the International Remote Viewing Association's conference in New Mexico in October. So we're going to be...
Gosh.
That's going to be so much fun. I don't know how much we're going to be able... Where we're going to be able to take the cameras, but they're supposed to be like skywatching at Lynn Buchanan's ranch and like all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So we're really excited about that. And we're going to dive into some remote viewing stuff. We're going to go sit with one of the most famous channeling groups who's never allowed themselves to really be filmed before. We're just going for it. So there's a few big stories that we're pursuing, and an even bigger one that I'm not allowed to talk about, but that will become, if it happens, because you know how UFO world is, but if it happens, people will know in the next couple of weeks what I was talking about.
I have a background in music, and so what I immediately thought of is some of my favorite stuff that ever happened in the history of recorded music, which is the field work of John and Alan Lomax working for the Library of Congress in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, going out there and getting recordings that no one would ever have heard otherwise, going to the absolute source and bringing it home for people to listen to, rather than someone going like, this is what I think it should be, or this is a cleaned up version of what, just going, this is what it is. This is the true American expression. And for you to be doing this, I think is going to provide such a clearer picture, right? Instead of just commentary, the documentarian approach is just thrilled me. So I wish you Godspeed and every success.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be sitting with a bib and a knife and a fork waiting to yum, 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 the whole thing. So when do you think the launch date is?
I mean, within the next month, we should probably have the first episode out. Like, we're trying to move pretty fast on this. I don't want to... Jay is going to be listening to this and be like, don't tell him that soon, because he has to produce it. But yeah, soon.
Sooner than later.
Chop, chop, Jay. Chop, chop.
Right?
Put the coffee on, son.
We are not patient. We are not waiting. Speaking of traveling, one of the things that we wanted to bring up with you was this idea that maybe the veil is a little thinner in some places. My head gets weird about this stuff because I think about relative movement in the time-space sort of, ether, that not only is the planet spinning constantly, but it's also orbiting the sun, and the sun itself is moving, and the galaxy itself is moving relative to everything, So what's your frame of reference? And so I remember reading this great sci-fi book when I was younger, where all of humanity got loaded up onto this giant ship, and then the ship was taken off the Earth by literally just being stopped. So they stopped the ship from moving, and so it just kind of went, because the Earth was moving away from the ship. Anyway.
Yes,
so
physics.
I get a little confused about how it could work if you talked about things being tied to locations, like physical locations, because I'm like, well, we're always moving. So like, what is the frame of reference? Are there places where the veil is thinner, and how does that work? If you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, no, this is something Jay and I spent a lot of time talking about last week, because we were intentionally kind of going to window areas just to kind of see what would happen. And, we had a lot of conversations about like what even is a window area and what causes that. And obviously we don't know. I have a lot of ideas about it. One idea is, and I'm sure that I'm I feel like quantum mechanics is so abused, but we all understand it just enough.
Where we dump all of our mysteries. We're like, it's gotta have some. It's gotta be quantum something.
Spooky action at a distance.
Right. What else do you need to know? But if there is something going on where like an observer is collapsing some sort of wave function, if the observer is in some way causing reality to resolve into one version or another, I think just in general that we underestimate how just generally spooky rural areas can be, and how reality, it would make sense to me, would move differently in a city than it would move in, out in the middle of nowhere where there's fewer people collapsing that wave. Like, does that allow...
Oh, man. Oh, that's good. That's really good. Oh, I just like, I've got little soul shivers going on right now. That's really, really good. I've lived in cities most of my life. But like, I've also spent some time like very much in remote places, and there's something about that is, I think, deeply important to the human experience, and I feel disconnected from it if I don't have the opportunity to try to get away from the sort of thrum of dense human life. But man, what a cool idea.
Oh,
Please continue.
I'm glad you're excited about it. I want to be clear that Ea Whiteley has not said this, but I am. So Ea Whiteley is a space psychologist. She was in our first season of Cosmosis, and I've gotten the chance to interview her a couple of times, and she's so fascinating. She literally works with astronauts who are like coming back from space and who are going to space, and deals with, and I'm sure knows all kinds of crazy stuff about what goes on up there. And so there's all sorts of things that she can't say, but something that I've read into her work that may or may not be there is that human consciousness fundamentally changes when we're taken off planet, and that there's like things that are allowed in or that they get access to that don't happen when we're kind of sharing this shared space, this shared mind space on Earth. I don't know if that's true, but I've suspected. And so that's sort of where that idea about window areas began. I also think that those researchers that we were talking to with all that, those many decades of experience, I was asking them because the place that they are is a place where there's been some famous landings and retrievals of UFOs, but there's also hauntings, Sasquatch, Thunderbird, Dogmen, like, all of the above, Black Panthers that aren't supposed to live there, and all of these things. And I asked them, like, what do you think it is about this area? People from Skinwalker Ranch have come out and worked with them, and like they recognize that like what's going on where they are is kind of the same thing that's going on at Skinwalker. And I'm like, so what is that? And their theory had to do with electromagnetism, and particularly with power sources, high tension power lines, nuclear plants, power plants, and also I think just geomagnetically active places on the planet, and that there's some sort of interaction there. What I find really interesting about that is that people are talking more and more about plasma science and about this idea that plasma might be a substrate for consciousness. But the thing that needs to be true for plasma to take on the level of complexity that it would need to take on, and that it does take on, to hypothetically support consciousness is exposure to electromagnetism. And so, once again, we're talking about plasma. That's the fourth state of matter. That's 99% of the visible universe is made out of plasma. And we're just getting around to being like, I wonder if plasma has anything to do with this. So those are just two ideas. But I think something's going on there that creates these window areas where the veil seems to be thin. And I think our science is just like on the very, very beginning of being able to kind of process what that might mean.
Do you think it's smart or not smart to just go to one of these places, to just get in your car and just drive to a place that you've heard the veil is thin and just hang out and see what happens?
I don't know if it's smart. There's a conversation we had about that I think might make it into the first episode about like, are we sure we really want to do this? Because, the hitchhiker effect is a real thing, and exposure to the anomalous, there's something addicting about it. Like once you've experienced it, there's this kind of desire, like I want it again, even though it just completely destabilized me. So I think you have to understand what exactly it is that you're getting into. And I think that, being careful about the intentions that you bring to it, but there's always an element of it that you can't control. And so you have to be aware that things could get weird, and they probably will.
I mean, even moving away from the idea of, whatever, portals or the veil being thin, is this idea of psychogeography, that the way that we think and feel is affected by our physical environment, and I think of Christopher Wren's redesigning of the city of London after it burned in like a giant pentagram or something, because he had these ideas that he could affect people and change their behaviors, have an effect on that. I'll need to nail that down. I might be talking out of my butt, but I think that is generally true. And it is the case that you have a different experience in different parts of the world, from a rural setting to an urban setting. And so I think your own safety is paramount, but you need to go out there and see, what does the sky look like? How dry is it? How wet? What is the environment? And how does that affect you beyond any potential paranormal expressions that might be happening there?
No, I agree. And it's so important. I'm a city girl, and I feel very kind of cut off from nature most of the time. And it was really great just to get out there. And I think that indigenous cultures and cultures throughout human history have seemed to have this kind of understanding of and connection to certain sacred landscapes, some understanding of place that we don't have. It's like we've gone blind in some ways to something that was apparently of supreme importance.
What you're talking about is pilgrimages. And you're talking about people choosing to go to places, not just because something happened there one time that they thought was interesting or important, but also because they think the place itself has some kind of power. I'm going to try not to make too light of this, but like we came up with a term in a recent episode, materialist appropriation, and I'm waiting now for the materialist appropriation of pilgrimages. Say, oh, well, the reason that you're going to this place is because there's been a lot of quantum waveform collapsing and electromagnetic. Anyway, we're trying to sort of like put science-y words on a phenomenon that, like, Western civilization, not all of Western civilization, but especially our, where we come from, like, has largely abandoned the idea of pilgrimages. And it's like something that old people do or other cultures do, and like sort of superstitious and a waste of time. Maybe we don't think about it anymore. And then we're kind of coming full circle and we're like, oh, what, maybe that thing that people have done for many, many thousands of years is important for really deep and substantial and concrete reasons.
I think it's beautiful, having grown up on the Death Star, to realize that there are real stars out there. And I want to go explore them.
Yes.
Yeah.
It feels like it's reclaiming a lost heritage. And yes, it's a shame that it was lost. But when you talk about human potential, it's not about making yourself more sort of biomechanical. It's about literally like fulfilling a potential that we have had and have, that we somehow have convinced ourselves doesn't exist. I was just reading a piece that I'll be talking about in a future episode about how, materialist appropriation of scientists are now going like, time isn't linear, and, deja vu and precognition are actually your consciousness being entangled with your future self. And now we put the stamp on it and it's official. And I'm like, yes, but we knew that. And if people have that ability, if that is nascent to us, what we call our gut or something, our intuition, spooky, is actually a real thing, a way of navigating this world, that's extraordinary. And it's not available only to the elect. It is ours. It is our inheritance. And that's what I love about your show, and that's what I love about our show, more than, the fun, weirdness. Weirdness is fun. But it's really about that, just exploring and being in that place where you go like, this is ours, This is a process of reclamation.
I completely agree. There's this kind of modern worldview that we have, that there's kind of the arrow of time, that we're all moving in one direction, that we're constantly moving from states of lesser complexity to greater complexity, from lesser knowledge to more knowledge, and that it only goes in that one direction. And yet it seems as though we have forgotten so much. Because once again, like, if plasma can be a substrate of intelligence, then like certainly the sun must be some kind of an intelligence. And if the sun is an intelligence, then
turns out the sun really is God.
Right? Like, they had it right the first time.
Well, sorry.
Sorry about that.
If nothing else, if you treat the sun and the moon as sacred, then at some point you're treating yourself as sacred.
Yes.
And if you treat yourself as sacred in a way that is not brittle arrogance, then you're treating your fellow travelers as sacred beings.
Yeah.
And when you do that, the moment you allow that possibility, so much of what we just accept in the course of human civilization is utterly unacceptable.
Yes.
In terms of, you go like, oh, wait, poverty is a societal choice. And you just go like, oh my God, that cannot be. I feel like I got up on a soapbox, but like,
I completely agree. I think that there's so much about our value system that's just screwed up. And it's because we don't have these recognitions of not just the anomalous, but just kind of the more enchanted parts of our reality. And as soon as you start to reincorporate those things, if you take them seriously, even a little bit, if you follow the implications to where they lead, even just a bit, you come to this place where our value system just makes absolutely no sense.
Tom, you saying poverty is a societal choice. It's devastating that we have, for many generations now, we've lived in a world of insane abundance that, like, no one has to be hungry. The idea that we fight wars based on resource scarcity is a fiction. It hasn't been true for a long, long, long time.
Yeah. And here I am reading, the fragments of Heraclitus and the Chandogya Upanishad, and this stuff is 2,500 years old, and these guys had already figured it out. And
we
when
learn the same lessons.
when
we
in
relearn
the
same
Upanishads,
lessons over
where
and over.
they're saying, what is the difference between the soul, the individual, the Atman, and the Brahman, which is the source, the everything? And they are told, "Thou art that." And like once you allow that, we are Earth, or if you look at the sun, you are the sun. Everything changes and sort of follows with it. Your own posture to yourself is going to dictate your relationships, not only to your fellow beings, but to things that you might find otherwise upsetting or threatening or strange.
That's what I love about all of this inquiry, is that, you go into it talking and thinking about non-human intelligence, but at the end of the day, I think it always brings us back to ourselves. I think non-human intelligence has an absolute reality, and that is something that we're living with already currently on Earth. But even if it's just an idea, I think that there is so much worth in contemplating it and inquiring after it, because without that, we don't have that mirror to look at ourselves and to ask these questions about who we are and about who we want to be.
We're basically trying to devote our lives pursuing that inquiry. And I'm so thrilled to be a part of that and a part of, like, just on the same path as you guys. I'm delighted by that. Truly.
Oh, I'm delighted too. I mean, it's so much fun. The real disclosure is the friends you make along the way.
I said the same thing.
Because it ends up being so true for all of us.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
The people that I've met through the experiencer community are, on the whole, just some of the sweetest, most compassionate, most open-hearted people I've ever met in my life. I think that there's a place that it takes you and it just cracks you open to the experiences of others and to the reality of how alone we all ultimately are, in a way that none of us can fully access the other. And there's something about anomalous experience and the isolation of that, I think, that really brings that home to people. But then that in return, I think, like, opens them way, way up to try to find that connection. And it's a beautiful community. It really is. And I think experiencers are gonna save the world. I really do.
I mean, that's the pack I want to run with.
Well, to that end, Kelly, God bless you, and God bless the work you're doing. And,
yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
And if there's a single person who's listening to this show right now who has not checked out Cosmosis,
oh my God, get on it.
If you're new here, be sure to check out our Substack, where you can find a lot more cool stuff and share your own stories with us. Just head over to godsghostsufos.com or find the link in the description. Also, a quick reminder that no matter where you're listening, reviews really, really help other people find the show. So, hint, hint, please leave us one. All right, thanks again. See ya.